Chris Hinshaw, what are people doing wrong when it comes down to not just their zone 2 training, but also their high intensity training, any of their aerobic training altogether? Because there's a lot of messy stuff out there. It's hard to distill it.
I mean, that's the problem, is that a lot of people, there's a lot of voices. And for the average consumer, they get confused. And what do we really need to do? And the problem is twofold, right? You mentioned zone 2, but also the high intensity. In the high intensity, we see adaptation across the board, whether you're a recreational beginner all the way up to the most elite. If you do high intensity, 20-second sprints with 10 seconds of rest, 8 rounds, you're gonna see improvement. It's high value, but it's not sustainable. What's gonna happen is, after a short amount of time, the body will adapt and then you're gonna plateau. And that's the problem, is that it creates an immediate value, but it's not long lasting. And so what people do is, oh, what I did is I jumped to the top. I need to look and focus on foundation. And so they read up on zone 2, and there's a lot of information on zone 2, but zone 2, as you know, it's heart rate driven stimulus. What you're doing is monitoring your intensity based upon heart rate. But we are not trying to train for a physiological adaptation in what our heart is telling us in terms of intensity. We're interested in a neuromuscular adaptation. We're interested in the speed that we're moving at zone 2. And so what I tell people is yes, it is good to use zone 2 heart rate as a gauge when you look at your watch of how are you actually doing in terms of your intensity. But as a coach, what I'm really driving for is how fast, what is your speed at that particular heart rate? You've got to realize that we're looking at our neuromuscular system, because that's what's going to get you through that 5K, that 10K. We're not training for physiological adaptation based upon heart rate.
I put a link down below for 30% off through Thrive Market, simply because A, I use them all the time. It's a good recommendation. They're a sponsor on this channel, but also they have betaine supplements there. So you can go to Thrive Market, you can search in their supplement section for betaine. They have freeze-dried beets. They have other beet snacks. They also have sustainable meat and seafood options, so you can get shrimp. They also have wheat bran. So you can get all the things that are rich in betaine, but you can get them at 30% off because you're using that special link down below. Plus, you can do the rest of your grocery shopping too. So you can do all your grocery shopping, load up your grocery cart, get 30% off, and get a free $60 gift when you use that link down below. So when it comes down to getting specific things, Thrive Market really makes a lot of sense, because you can also tag it along with your regular grocery as well. And then it gets delivered to your doorstep. So super easy peasy lemon squeezy. So that link, again, exclusive discount at 30% off for your whole grocery cart in that link down below. So when you talk physiological adaptation, you're talking to just a regular person. Would you say that zone 2 and looking at zone 2 as almost this objective marker is almost misleading? Do you think that people should be focusing on something different than saying like, hey, I need to be in X heart rate zone? Because there's like almost a fixation on that, and it's hard to, it comes with good merit, but yeah. I also wonder if it's really, there's almost too many definitions for zones to begin with.
Oh my God, I mean, look at heart rate. Like people say, like when I ask people, I said, so do you know your maximum heart rate? No, but I follow 220 minus my age. It's like, well, I mean, there's what, 15 different formulas just for maximum heart rate. I don't know how many different formulas there are for zone 2. And so unless you got a true test done, right, a metabolic test, how do you even know what your numbers are? So there's the kid from Brazil, Guilherme Harris, that, the CrossFit Games, and I think he got 5th at the Games a couple of years ago, and he publicly did a Vo2max test. And I know Guy very well, and a lot of respect for him. Very strong kid, but he is a speed, strength, power-based athlete. And he publicly is getting up and he's going to do a Vo2max test. And it's broadcast. You can see his numbers as he's progressing through. And I'm like, you never want to let this out, because it shows the community what's inside. And if your number is low, then it's going to show people how to beat you. And he had just got 5th at the Games, and he went ahead and did it. And here he was 20 years old. And so if you follow maffetones, 180 minus your age to ballpark your zone 2 range, right? He should be around 160. So imagine he's doing his zone 2s at 160. His zone 2 was a heart rate of 106. And so part of the problem is that if you follow a formula, it's just ballpark. So knowing that, you got to take it with a grain of salt. You've got to realize that it's not as precise as you may think. And so it's just a tool to gauge your level of intensity from workout to workout. So what I would tell people is this. Zone 2, it is really important to know what your zone 2 is, because this would be considered easy pace, right? Your aerobic pace. This is where your recovery comes from. This is where your ability to endure comes from. This is where your ability to clear fatigue comes from. Your ability to recover comes from. Most people don't know how to define low intensity. And so most people, like you even said, we were talking, right? If I had you go run without a heart rate monitor, you would eventually settle into a pace. And then if I checked heart rate, you'd be at
150, 160. Yeah.
Because this is where we just naturally gravitate to. And people don't realize that easy is significantly less than that. So it's a way for a coach to just go, no. Here's the numbers. Here's the research. Here is what is considered easy. It makes it so there's no argument. It makes it so that there's buy-in. But what I tell people is that if you always just do that heart rate and you only look at that heart rate, eventually the body's going to create adaptation. So what's the goal? And this comes into this whole subject of, when you build foundation, what is considered foundational volume? In my opinion, for the everyday athlete, it's 20 minutes. What I want to see is I want to see you be able to do a zone 2 workout for 20 minutes without stopping. Well, a lot of people say, well, why would you stop? Because what we have to be careful of in that zone 2 is what are our muscles doing as we're progressing through that 20 minutes. So think, for example, you. So let's just say you're 40 years old, right? So you can put your zone 2 at a heart rate of 140, right? Following Maffetones. And what we're going to do is do plus or minus 5. So your heart rate would be between 135 and 145 would be your range. So what I want you to do is 20 minutes at that range. Now, you're going to take off and you're going to start running and you're going to be at that range, but you're also going to look at your speed. And let's just say the speed starting out is like an 8-minute mile speed. You're going to be continuing on and you're going to be looking at just heart rate, right? Now, as you get tired, your muscles get fatigued. What is going to happen to that 8-minute mile speed as you get closer to the 20 minutes? What's going to happen is your heart rate will still be within range, but because you're fatigued, you have to slow down. So you started at 8-minute pace, but then what you end at 10-minute pace, right?
Yeah. Or you end up going same pace and heart rate skyrocketing.
Which you've ruined it both ways, right? So now if you're started at 8 and you ended up at a 10, but your heart rate stayed the same, you just taught your muscles to what? They went fast in the beginning and you ended teaching them to go slow. And what we're trying to teach them to do is what? We're trying to teach them to endure at a specific speed. So it's the same thing like you said. People outsmart themselves, and what we're going to do is just focus on 8-minute pace, and then they end up with a high heart rate. Well, the reason why your heart rate went up is because your slow twitch fibers didn't have capacity. They didn't have the ability to endure, and you needed your fast twitch fibers to come in and support the intensity level. And that's why your heart rate spikes. So the rule is that if your heart rate goes up by 5, meaning yours hits 145, you're losing the purpose of the workout, meaning you're starting to recruit fast twitch fibers. And it's supposed to be a slow twitch aerobic workout. So you use the heart rate to realize I'm losing the purpose of what I'm trying to adapt. And what I would tell you to do is walk. And I want you to walk until your heart rate hits 135. Because walking is going to be slow twitch. Now your heart rate's recovered and you're going to go back to running again. So you stay at the same speed and within the range. Your task is to do 20 minutes without walking. Now, once you make it, you got to do something different. And this is where you would adapt to going 5 minutes longer, right? 25 minutes, same rules. Or the other option is do a pace that's 15 minutes per mile faster and sticking with the same 20-minute rule. So one direction increases volume, the other increases speed. But you have to get the athlete first to realize what is easy pace.
It's interesting that you say that because I specifically notice it's almost like clockwork for me if I'm on say a 7-mile run. At almost invariably at 5.5 miles in, my heart rate takes an abnormally weird leap. And I never really was able to understand. Now it's starting to kind of click that there's almost an inefficiency that's happening there. The fast twitch is coming in, but it's happening like clockwork because I've trained my body to just adapt to that.
Well, but imagine okay, so the way it works is that your brain is responsible for your recruitment of muscle fibers. So what it's doing is it's evaluating the amount of force, and it gives you enough of the motor units to match that required force. So if you're running slow, it just gives you enough slow twitch fibers. It would never give you your fastest of the fast. It saves those. So it gives you a small amount of those. All of your other fibers are resting. These fibers will now be allowing you to do that zone 2 easy pace. Those fibers will eventually fatigue and fail, and the brain shuts them off and it recruits new ones. And it continues to cycle through all of your slow twitch fibers until you get back to the original recruited fibers that are still recovering. And what happens at 5.5 miles in is that you've come back around, and now these slow twitch fibers that need to go back into the run, back in the game, they need more time to recover because you don't have enough aerobic adaptation. You haven't done enough long, slow, zone 2 easy pace work. So because you have more volume, what do? I got 50% of my body, because most people are 50-50 blends of fast twitch and slow twitch. I got 50% of my arsenal sitting here passive, not doing anything. And you substitute in a fast twitch fiber to maintain your pace. And the fast twitch fibers finish it. And that's why you see your heart rate start to spike, because the fast that's a sign that you're now starting to recruit because they need more oxygen. So breathing rate goes up and heart rate goes up. You just rewarded your slow twitch fibers' inability to endure by relieving of their obligation. Why would they ever develop more capacity if you always substitute them and say, don't worry, I can take it from here?
You've enabled them.
And that's the problem. Most people, they think faster is always better. But then how do you develop the ability to endure if you always reward the slow twitch fibers' inability to endure? You're ruining your situation. That's why elite marathon runners run so much volume at easy pace, because they don't want 26.2 mile to be that type of a failure. What you want to do is when you loop through and you use all of your slow twitch fibers, you want to come back and recycle and recycle and recycle and recycle. Until when? You encounter an obstacle, right, where you absolutely need fast twitch fibers, where you have to put them in the game, otherwise you can't move on. Or towards the finish, when you need to accelerate your speed. That's why endurance is really something that's fascinating to me, because the only time it's difficult is when you encounter an obstacle, like if you're on a bike, you got a steep mountain pass, and the last 2 minutes. And that's it. The rest of it is you just hang out and wait.
So people that are watching and listening to this, they're thinking, okay, well, I'm not a runner, but everything that we're talking about is directly transferable to someone that is literally just trying to get healthy and trying to walk, and I can tell you from my perspective, as perhaps maybe not a regular person in the sense that I'm probably sick and twisted in my fitness mind, but even the regular Joe that just wants to go out for a jog, it is excruciatingly difficult to accept fate and say, it's time for me to walk.
Yeah.
You're just going to keep schlepping through it, right? You're just going to keep running, you're going to keep running, and you feel like if you set out on a run, you have to seek it out to completion and you have to run the whole way. And I'll tell you from my own personal, it takes far more discipline for me to say, it's time to walk, than it does to just finish the run. So how would you directly translate this to someone that's trying to get themselves into the zone that they need to build base, but maybe running's not their thing? What is a good sort of progression so they don't fall into these traps?
Yeah, so one of the top programs that I am giving out into the community, and whether it's in military, it's in law enforcement, firefighting, but also the baby boomer community. One of the pieces that baby boomers, they're smart. They're very smart, they're educated, they know about zone 2. The problem is that their structure is failing, right? And so they're out there, but they're not getting full value out of what they're doing in the workout. And you and I, one of the great things that I love talking to you is like, we recognize if we have an amount of time with somebody, our task and what it is to maximize the adaptation within that individual in the fastest amount of time. But they also have to understand it. They have to buy into it. So, because once we hand it to them, they're kind of on their own. And so with this baby boomer community, what's resonating with them is somehow walking, but elevating their heart rate to get it within zone 2 on a walk. And the way that they're doing it was with a ruck. What they're taking is a backpack. They're putting a small amount of weight, and they're adding weight based upon their walking speed to get their heart rate into their zone 2. And that's how they decide how much weight to add based upon their pace. And so that's a fast and simple way for them to do it. But what I'm teaching them to do is make it really simple by doing a workout, which is next level, and not focusing on your speed. Like a lot of them are focused on, I need to do what the military does. And that is, I want to do 3.5 miles an hour, or I want to do a 15-minute mile pace. Well, maybe that's not really what you should be doing, because that's a military application. This is for a younger audience. What we're talking about is someone who is 65, 68, 70 years old. Maybe what we should be doing is looking at your step rate. And so what I tell people is that when you're doing your first 20-minute ruck or walk, every now and then, count the number of steps you take in 1 minute. And let's just say that you're taking, 130 steps in a minute. You would do that probably 2 or 3 times during the 20 minutes. And the beautiful thing about the body is you establish a rhythm, and that cadence within 1 step or 2, meaning you'll see if you check it 3 times, you'll be 129, 130, 130. It will be really, really close every time. That's your natural cadence. So that would be considered your easy pace. Fast pace is something that would be 10 steps per minute faster. So what you would do is you would tell somebody is what I want you to think about is easy pace. And what you're going to gradually do is you're going to do maybe 10 steps fast, higher cadence. Not running, it's just fast cadence. Eventually, your fast cadence takes over your slow cadence. But you have to get an athlete to realize that here is your starting point. Your goal is to get to 20 minutes, but what is your speed based upon? You need to know what your variables are. Most people that walk don't look at intensity. And what we're going to do is we're going to do it based upon the number of steps that you take. But we're not going to just always run or walk slow, because if you always walk slow, you're going to always be slow. And what we need to do is challenge people. So it's fast cadence into slow cadence.
So with that, that's a perfect introduction into occasionally dabbling into higher intensity and some of the issues that people have with that, some of the misnomers, some of the kind of, I don't want to say mistakes per se, but how people might be perceiving high intensity correctly versus incorrectly. And when you look at, let's just say a middle-aged population, let's say someone, 40 to 60, someone in there, or 35 to 60 even, and you start looking at high intensity, what would you say is the appropriate dosage? I'm not talking from any longevity perspective, and then on this channel, we obviously talk a lot about the science and the longevity piece, and here's what this body of research says, yada, yada, yada. And I love that stuff, but I also feel like most people have a certain element where they're just like, I want to achieve and get the best possible outcome that I can today. Stop trying to sell me insurance about how much longer I'm going to live. Okay, like that's a mystery. There's so many other variables. They just want to know, how do I get in shape? Period. So what is the right amount of high intensity? How should that look?
So, wow, that's a great question. So I like this 80-20 rule, but when I take the 20, so 80-20 meaning 80% of it's below lactate threshold, more in the zone 2 range, and 20% is above lactate threshold. But then I take the 20 and chop it into another 80-20. And so that 80-20 split is more above lactate threshold, but there's a 20% that is considered very high intensity sprinting based work.
Can you describe just for the layperson what LT1, LT2 lactate threshold is? Just in a very simple 500-foot aerial view.
I would equate it to so let's equate it to climbing Mount Everest. Mount Everest, it's 29,000 feet, right? So when you climb Mount Everest, you encounter right at Camp 4, just above Camp 4, around 26,000 feet, there's the death zone. And the death zone above that is where there's insufficient oxygen to keep the brain alive. So if you go into that death zone with 100% certainty, if you stay there, you will die. So it's a race against time when you climb Mount Everest, is that you leave Camp 4, you got to summit and then get down below the death zone into Camp 4 before you die. Okay, so that's what it's all about. What I want you to think about is your maximum sustainable pace is that death zone. You can go above that maximum sustainable pace, but you can't survive there. You got to go back down below the line. So this lactate threshold, your maximum sustainable pace, is a barrier. What we do in training is, if we focus on this barrier, what we can do is a higher intensity, right, and still stay below it. The more time we train here, the greater level of adaptation. Meaning, instead of your death zone at 26,000 feet, it starts at 27,000 feet. So meaning you actually can recover by getting below the line sooner after a high intensity surge or after a very hard obstacle. So that maximum intensity, that pace, is critical, because that is a limitation on performance. Matter of fact, one of the commanding generals in Quantico, he came over and he was asking me last year, he says, so, what are you hearing with, the Marines? And I said, well, there's a lot of talk about, it's bullshit that we are running 3 miles and the Navy's doing 1.5 miles, and, Buds, they're doing 1.5 miles, and Air Force 1.5 miles, FBI, Secret Service are all 1.5 miles, but we're at 3 miles for our PFT. He said, what'd you tell him? And I said, well, you got to understand that 1.5 miles, it's a known test. It's a Cooper test that's been around since 1968. But it tests your Vo2max, your maximum ability to use oxygen. It doesn't give you an idea of what your sustainable speeds are. It's a maximum. It's considered high intensity. That's what high intensity training is. You have to slow down and get below the death zone to find your sustainable pace. And I go, you want to know what your 3-mile your test tells you? Is your sustainable speed. It tells you what their capabilities is now. It's the only relevant number that I look at. It doesn't matter what you're capable of doing in 6 minutes. I want to know what you could sustain. And that's what lactate threshold is. Now, what's interesting is your lactate threshold is either limited by, I need more speed, meaning what's above the line, more strength, more power, more high intensity, or I need better recovery. I need more zone 2. I need better endurance. I need better stamina. So which of these two in that movement, because every movement's different, is preventing you from doing more work?
Interesting. So, I mean, it does in a way come full circle. The ability to do more maximal work comes down to your ability to recover by building that base.
For some athletes. But let's say that you're a remarkable endurance athlete. Maybe your limitation is you need more speed, you need more strength, you need more power output.
Yeah, I guess if you already have an established base, then that makes sense. But if you're someone that, if you were to take a marathon, elite marathoner or an ultra marathoner and ask them to sprint, it's probably not going to look very great.
That's correct. Yeah. That's why, like we were talking about, he, and what his aerobic threshold number was, right? Lactate threshold 1. Like, that point there is very low. He's going to win all the maximum strengths. If it comes down to a 400-meter sprint, to 200 meters, he's going to win. He'll always win a time domain under 2 minutes. That's his genetic base. But if he wants to be more well-rounded, then where should he spend his time? And so you have to look at an athlete and go, well, what's your goal? Oh, I want to win the CrossFit Games. What I want to do is be more well-rounded. Well, okay, so then you need to spend more time here. But what if Usain Bolt comes to you and says, my aerobic threshold number, my recovery is lousy? Well, yeah, because your events are under 19 seconds. It's your event. And so you have to listen to an athlete of going, what do you want to do? Because I'm going to steer the stimulus to achieve your goal. So like Usain Bolt, it's important for him. Like one of the pieces, he's got to run the 100, the 200. He had the 4x1 relay. His recovery between rounds mattered, but he's not going to go out and do 6-mile, 8-mile runs because it's going to change what his true event is, which is fast twitch, short time domain, explosive. So what does he do though? He has to realize that his recovery matters, but his recovery is awful. Like if he did a Vo2max test, I'll bet he couldn't do 3 minutes because he's not trained that way. But what does he do? What you will see him do is a 100-meter sprint and then a slow jog. What he will do is create fatigue and then actively clear it. He's not going to sprint and sit in a chair because he wants to develop the ability to accelerate the removal of fatigue. So instead of recovering by doing nothing, he's going to force his body to recover by doing something. So if you could recover, let's say, like I work with a lot of athletes that can run way under 8-minute mile pace and recover from anything in the CrossFit world. They can get their heart rate into zone 2 at sub 8 pace. So imagine that you can do a high intensity interval workout and go out at 8-minute mile pace and recover. Well, imagine your recovery pace is a 12-minute mile pace, right? That's still incredible, isn't it? That you can get your heart rate down below 160 at a 12-minute mile pace. Well, then imagine you sit in a chair and do nothing. Heart rate reduction matters. When you do a VO2 test, what do? They make you wear your mask for 2 minutes afterwards. They're looking at the rate of heart rate reduction. And so that's why, like with the athletes I work with, one of the pieces I look at is what is the slope of the recovery after a certain interval where their heart rate starts, like a peak heart rate, like 170 or 180 or whatever the number starting point, but also how deep into the workout it is. That rate of recovery tells me a lot about the aerobic fitness of that athlete. So a lot of people look at the acceleration of fatigue, right? The acceleration of heart rate and that slope. I want to know what the recovery is, because more than likely your limitation in anything is I just get tired.
And I want to come back to all this, but before I interrupted you about the LT2 piece, you were starting to say about the 80-20 and then further dividing the 20 into another 80-20. So as far as the high intensity work goes, and I do want to come back to all this because this is fascinating, but I want to let you finish that piece. So for the right amount of high intensity.
So a lot of people, this word high intensity gets tossed around. And so one of the pieces that I really I get a lot of my inspiration from like the scientific community. And so I see this thing on CrossFit, constantly varied, functional movement, high intensity. What's that mean? Like, what is high intensity? And so I did a deep dive into like let's define that. Like, what's the physiological definition of high intensity? Like, how are we? And what I came up with was high intensity is your Vo2max. It is what Vo2max is, your maximum aerobic capacity, your ability to bring in oxygen and use that oxygen in the muscles that are moving. So every single movement has its own unique Vo2max because it's addressing the muscles that are being used. So I can get a Vo2max test score in running, but it doesn't tell me anything about my Vo2max in swimming, which doesn't tell me anything about my VO2 in running. It's measuring the muscles that are being used. That's why when people get a test done, they do it in the movement that they've trained in that movement. That's why if you're a runner, you do it in running, okay? So this maximum ability to utilize oxygen, this Vo2max, your aerobic capacity, this maximum oxygen uptake is what I consider to be high intensity. And so how do you define that for the person to understand? Like, how would I get you to define high intensity so that you knew this was something that was improving my VO2, my aerobic capacity, my ability to move and utilize oxygen? And I classify it in that 6-minute time domain. Now you have to remember that the people that I work with are hybrid athletes. They're athletes that like to lift, they like to run, but they'll also go into a Barry's boot camp. They'll do Pilates, they'll do yoga, they'll do bike rides, they'll do rucks. They want variety. So they're more recreational athletes. So 6 minutes is something where I would classify that as high intensity. Anything at a time domain under 6 minutes. So here's an example. Let's say you want to hop on a rower and you want to know what high intensity is. I would have you do a 6-minute time trial on that rower. What is your average wattage in that 6 minutes? Let's just say it's 300 watts, all right? Anything 300 watts or higher is considered high intensity. What is considered recovery? It would be half of that number, 150. So if you want to do a workout that is high intensity, what I would like to see is a workout that had alternating 300 watts and into 150 watt active recovery. 300 watts into 150 watts. The rule of thumb on time is 1-to-1. So if you did 1 minute at 300 watts, I would like to see 1 minute at 150 watts. The more time you spend at 300 watts, the greater adaptation.
Interesting. So is it more important to maintain the intensity and the integrity of the high intensity interval than it is to have X amount of rest? If it takes someone 3 minutes to rest in order to get themselves 30 seconds of high intensity, what is more important, the integrity of that 30 seconds or the recovery time?
So this is where it comes down to the purpose of the workout. Like, what are we trying to do? And so, yes, you can go do a workout that's 400 watts, but why? What is the reason why you're doing 400 watts? Like, why? If you just established that your high intensity target at 6 minutes is 300, then you should be spending time at that 300. And the more time you spend at it, the greater level of adaptation you will make at your ability to move and utilize oxygen. So I always ask people like, okay, but why?
Yeah.
If you're training for something that's a 3-minute time domain and it works 400 watts, that makes sense to me. But it's like, there's nothing you're training for. So if we're working on overall physiological adaptation and we know that maximum aerobic uptake, your VO2, is critical, then let's target that. And so what I would tell you is, we already established that, right? You did a echo bike workout, and what you did is you did 6 minutes for time, and your average wattage is 250 watts. So I want to improve this. I want to improve my ability to move and utilize oxygen on the echo bike. And how would I do it? Here's the problem. A lot of people would think high intensity, I need to follow it up with a recovery that does nothing. And the problem is that when you do your 250 watt interval at, let's say, 1 minute, and now you have a 1 minute rest, when that 250 watts, your heart rate's in the sweet spot. And now you're creating adaptation. And now you rest for a minute and you're recovering. Your heart rate's falling and falling and falling. It's falling away from the sweet spot. Now your next interval starts. It's only 1 minute long. You spend 30 seconds getting it ramped back up to the sweet spot. So now in every 1 minute interval, you've only spent 30 seconds. The reason why you want to follow it up with an active recovery at half of that, so in this case on the echo bike would be 125 watts, is because your heart rate doesn't drop so far. So when you start the next interval, you're back in the sweet spot. You actually spend way more time creating adaptation. And so what's the progression? What I want you to do is, as you progress, if you don't create adaptation, then what's going to happen is you're going to stop getting better. Matter of fact, the workout will make you worse. So what we need to do is vary the intensity, the stimulus of the intensity. So what I want is, I can't change your 250 watts because it's been established unless you retest, right? So what are we going to do? We're going to add more volume. So let's just say that you did 8 rounds of 1 minute on with 1 minute of active recovery. You got 8 minutes of total time. The next time you do a workout, I need more than 8 minutes. And the holy grail would be is to get upwards of 5 rounds of 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off would be record setting. So what I want to see you do is recognize that the best in the world are challenged at what I just told you of 5 rounds, 3 minutes on, 3 minutes off. What I want you to do is stair step your way. So you can do 30 seconds on, 30 seconds off. You could do 45 on, 45 off. You could go 90 on, 90 off. It's always work to rest of 1-to-1, and the recovery is half the intensity, wattage.
So, and then I suppose you could always change the domain if you need to change it up and make it harder in a different way. Because it sounds like going beyond the 5 sets of the 3, or the 3 sets of the, or 5 sets of 3?
5 sets of 3, yeah.
It sounds like above and beyond that.
It's a long time if you think about it.
Just when it doesn't translate. I mean, especially for a regular person. Like, so, just what is the point of that?
But that's why when you said the prescription, right? So when I said I want 80-20 split, I only have 20% of my total training is in that high intensity spectrum, which I'm taking out 20 and putting that into sprints, whether it's sled sprints, hill sprints, flat sprints, right? It's there. So I have a small amount of my total training time to dedicate to what I just gave you. We're not talking about where you see it every week. You maybe see it every fourth workout, every fifth workout.
So with this, how would RPE come into this? Because a lot of this is pretty sharp ratios and data, but then there's this sort of subjective component of RPE, which with an athlete, I think it's easier to be able to say your RPE. You could ask me, I know what my 10 is, and I think one thing, I want to hear your explanation of RPE for the listeners and the viewers too, because I feel like it's a very important tool to know, but I want people to understand how RPE can be very relative based on how you feel that day, and that it's okay if your RPE 8 is a slower RPE 8 today than it was yesterday.
That's right.
That's the point, right?
That's right.
Is because you're factoring in mental, you're factoring in emotional, you're factoring in fatigue and all these things. But I also want to know how RPE overlays with some of the stuff that you're talking about. Like if they're doing an interval, is that interval, how do they know if they're going for 3 minutes? Like what should their RPE be at if they've never done it before?
Right.
Like how hard should this be? Or if they're doing an all out for 100 meters, like does that automatically make it a 10? I don't know if that question makes sense.
No, it does. So, that's the trickiest part is that I really like the question because too many times what I see is coaches just assume athletes know. And they don't know. Things are very complicated. Like, one of the things that we've talked about before is people will want to do something and they'll go online and they'll look. And they're not aware that what they're looking at is going to make them worse. They just don't know because they don't have. We've been lucky enough to spend dozens of years looking and realizing, especially being athletes, of what works and what doesn't work. And when people look up RPE, you have to know how that coach is defining their RPE. For me, I write a lot of workouts based upon RPE, and what I always will do is say, here is my intensity scale. Matter of fact, I'll send it to you, and you could let the readers followers watch it, see it. But what it is it is a table that has zones, and it has RPE from 0 to 10. I start at 1 and to 10. And what I am doing is defining what this is, so that when you see my workout, you're trying to find that rate of perceived exertion that matches up with how it feels in that chart. And so this chart, what we have is sometimes it's based upon talk test. Sometimes it's breathing, right? How many breaths are steps you're taking when running per cycle of breath. And there's all kinds of factors that you can use to help you understand what an RPE is, whether it's RPE of 1, RPE of 8. But for just answering the question right now, if I go from 1 to 10, what I would do is walking pace. Walking is a 1, all right, from my scale. If you look at what Borg did in his scale, you would be at Vo2 at a RPE of 5. It's too low for me. So where I do it, and that's why I release my table, is walking is 1, a slow jog, a recovery jog is a 2, a zone 2 workout is between a 3 and a 4. I will do a 5K somewhere around 5, 6. I will do 6-minute test at around an 8. And then an anaerobic type tolerance workout is a 9, and maximal sprints are 10s. And that's how I define it. And that way, when you're doing, let's say you did a 6-minute row maximal effort and you felt good that day, what I want you to do is have that same feeling, right? Not just physical, but emotional and mental in that RPE of 8. And that's where I don't worry so much when I program an RPE of 8. What I'm looking for is your physical and emotional, the stimulus that it's creating. But beyond that, the athletes that want to progress, and that's really the holy grail in programming, is personalization, where it's not based upon RPE. It's actually based upon a number like I gave you. People, that's what they want. It's the same thing when they talked about nutrition. Yep. I don't want some blanket sweeping statement that's supposedly good for the entire population. What about me?
Yeah. Oh, and it's literally, I mean, it's why we release like 40, 45 videos per month, because I refuse to just create blanket content. There's going to be content overlaps with nutrition. There's going to be content that speaks to one group, speaks to another group of people. Sometimes it's confusing because like you say one thing, well, it's because I'm talking to millions of people.
That's right.
And if I were to release 4 videos a month, it would be unfair.
Right.
Like, and it's like when you factor all those layers in, there's a million different ways to skin that cat.
But that's why it gets really confusing for the consumer. Yeah. And now they have access to more information than they've ever had. And so it makes it difficult. Like we were talking about marathon training. Imagine you have the courage where you put it out there and say, I want to do a marathon. Where do you go to train? Like, okay, I'll tell you my story. When I did Oakland Marathon way back, I decided to do Ironman the first time, and I knew it had a marathon. So I didn't know how to train. So what did I do? I entered the Oakland Marathon in 1981. And as my first training run, I figured to run a marathon, I got to run a marathon, and that's how you train. I didn't know anything about how it should be done. Matter of fact, when I show up on the starting line, I'm there with my sister, and I go, I wonder how fast we should go. And I went to a guy that was roughly 30 years old, and he was built like me, and I was probably 140 pounds and 5'10", and I'm like, how fast are you going? And he's like, yeah, I think I'm gonna run 3 today. And I'm like, nice round number. I don't know what 3 means. And so my point is like most people, like when they put it out there, how do they know? And I think that's the part that I take to heart. And it's like what resonates with what you do is you take a huge amount of ownership in that responsibility of I don't want to misguide people because they do have a limited window, and I want to maximize that value. And that I think that's one of the biggest challenges for me is that there is a lot of misinformation out there, and it's destructive for that one person. I mean, imagine you decide to do a marathon and it's a bad experience. You're never going to do it again.
Or worse, you get really hurt.
Or really hurt.
Yeah, or just, and there's a lot of, we call them like the optimized bros, where it's just like you're trying to optimize like people that have frankly no business optimizing because you just need foundation. It's like there's no need to be optimizing right now. Like optimization will come later. Like you need foundation.
Yes.
And I think it comes full circle back to everything. And it's something, and I hope that this is something that can resonate with people that look up to me on this channel or look up to you. Even myself as an athlete, it has been a very humbling experience to realize as someone I've run well over at least 24 marathons in my life. And I'm accepting that I need to go back to walking and rucking. And sometimes that psychologically is very difficult for me because I have to accept that for me to really build the foundation and to be able to recover, to be able to, like you said, everything, bringing it back mechanistically. For my heart rate for me to be able to do a set of box jumps and deadlifts and have my heart rate come down as fast as I want it to come down, I need to get my ass away from the 160 BPM runs.
Yep.
And I need to be rucking.
Yep.
And that is psychologically tough because now I'm throwing a weight vest on or a backpack on and I'm walking. And to me, that's like, this just seems beneath me. What am I doing? But in reality, it makes my deadlift, my box jump and everything. I am now, as far as the volume that I can do in a given workout, in a 1 hour time frame, I am accomplishing 20% more volume because I'm recovering faster.
That's right.
Between.
And you will find that you'll end up getting stronger because you're actually developing all of your slow twitch fibers. I mean, what I do is I look at the body. What are they leaving behind? If you are a average mix of 50% fast twitch and 50% slow twitch, are you fully optimizing all of your slow twitch fibers? Or are you always bailing them out so they don't actually have the capacity that they're capable of doing? Well, that's a massive limitation. And if it's happening in your legs, that's the biggest muscle group in the body. So why would we leave that low-hanging fruit on the table? What you will find is, I've been lucky enough to work with a lot of people that won the CrossFit Games, dozens, and there is not a single one of those people that have not gotten stronger. Not one. Because what we're looking at is this holistic approach of what are they leaving behind? And what we want to do is we want to maximize the entire structure, the body, because they're not a specialist. You're looking for overall fitness. You're a hybrid athlete. You want to be strong, but also this ability to endure. And so where is the low-hanging fruit? And the low-hanging fruit, if you're always going fast, more than likely, it's sitting below that death zone intensity. I always tell people, like, I love being out of shape because I don't have to suffer. Just go slow, and you're creating fitness. Your day of suffering is coming. So, like, enjoy. There's something pleasant about being out of shape because it's truly valuable. The problem is that people are brainwashed into thinking harder is better. And eventually, you're going to have to come back to it and build that foundation.
Yeah. No, it's you're not designed. Not every day is race day, and it's.
But that's hard, right? Because I like going full gas too.
No, you get addicted to the performance. You get addicted to the outcome. You get addicted to the result.
Or the fatigue, like we were saying. It's like, I feel really good. I freaking nuked. Yeah, I feel good today. It's like, why? Because I went full gas.
Yeah. But you're changing the paradigm and how you look at that. There's something also very refreshing when you leave enough in the tank to know that you can come back and do it tomorrow. Because, it's the definition of an addict in so many ways is being able to, the inability to delay gratification.
Yeah.
Right? And you'd see across the board, whether it's substance, whether it's alcohol, whether it's fitness, whether it's food, it's the inability to delay that gratification. And with myself, I would find that I could not delay the gratification to race day. I was my own limiting factor. My running was my limiting factor to running. My lifting was my limiting factor to lifting because I would just, every day was race day. Every day was game day.
So you hated tapering and to taper back, you're probably feeling, oh man, I'm losing my fitness.
Oh, it's so easy. And then you start, for me specifically, I have no problem taking ownership of this. Then I'd start, I'd taper, so then I'd calorie restrict because I wasn't training as hard.
Oh
so then you're just in a death spiral, right? When in reality,
and it's all self-talk. It's like you're just...
Now I do the opposite. Now when I decrease my training, I actually increase my calories slightly because I'm like, no, I'm in a rebuilding. I'm rebuilding. I need the fuel. And if I put on 1% body fat, who cares, right?
So I always second guess myself too because I'll always find myself way high up, too high. And I know better. Imagine you know better too, but you still get yourself caught up in it. Imagine the people they just don't know. I struggle with it all the time. I know what my zone 2 is. I was really proud about what we did today. Multiple hours at that zone 2. Yeah. It's impossible for me if I take a ruck off and go for a run to do what we did.
Yeah.
And I know better.
Same here.
And I kick myself when I walk in the door and I'm like, and Heidi's like, how'd you do? And it's like, I feel fine, but inside, it's like, I just ruined it. Yeah. But I don't, to walk on a run, it's like, I'm not doing it. And I know better. Yeah. Imagine the people that it's a hard thing. Yeah.
No, it takes a lot of confidence, and especially
confidence.
If you go for a run socially, you run with somebody, that's the worst. And it sucks because you want to do it. You want to enjoy a leisurely activity. But it's like, if you're going to do social hour with it, I highly recommend rucking or walking. Your running is highly variable and highly individualized. And it's very dangerous to go running with someone that's an experienced runner when you're not because they're going to leave you in the dust and make you go too fast and get hurt that way, but because you're going to completely start training the wrong energy system. And it quickly becomes exactly what you said. You're conditioning all the wrong things. Yeah,
I think about in the CrossFit space, athletes, when I got a chance to work with Matt Fraser, and I asked him, I said, how much time do you have? What is the availability, the layout? And I'm trying to create structure in the format. And he says, I'll run 2 days a week. That's all I'm going to run. Okay, so you have an athlete that wants to win the CrossFit Games, and he's telling you there's only 2 running workouts. Those have to maximize his adaptation. You can't cover up mistakes with volume. It has to be precise, but it has to also be applicable to where he is and where he wants to go. And that's a challenging piece. But every athlete should treat themselves the same. If you're only running twice a week, why are you ruining one of those opportunities? And you know better. Yeah. And that's why I tell people, it's like, if you don't know what the purpose of the workout is, then why are you doing it? Like, what's the reason? You should be doing something else then.
Yeah, so true.
But that's why it really resonated when we were talking earlier, because I struggle with it all the time. And so a little compassion, I get it. I know it's hard. I get it. And I have athletes all the time. Why are you having me go long and slow all the time? I've been doing this for 3 months. Yeah, because 3 months ago you only went 15 minutes and now you're doing 90 minutes. But it's still slow. Yeah, and that's a hard thing for people, because people think lifting heavy is sexy, running fast is sexy, running slow, walking, really?
Yeah.
But it should be 80%.
Amen to that, man. Well, Chris, where can everyone find you, brother?
Aerobiccapacity.com. Yeah, so come there. Luckily, we just did a deal with High Rocks. So High Rocks and we're partnering up. I just wrote part of their level 1. So I'm teaching their High Rocks Aerobic Capacity course, that's something really exciting for the community. I think it's a cool event and what they have done. And huge new opportunity for us.
Nice, man. Well, thanks, brother.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.